Awesome. Well, Justin, Andrew, I appreciate you both jumping on today to talk through agency. Before we really kick into it, can one or both of you share a little bit about Attention Agency and just your background in the advertising industry?
Yeah, Andrew, why don't you start?
Yeah. So I've been in digital marketing for a little over a decade now. Originally got my start in affiliate marketing and then transitioned into paid social, paid search, and then email and SMS. Really kind of like loved those elements of digital marketing. It's a lot of dollars in, dollars out, right? So you get that same instant gratification that you got from affiliate marketing from an operator standpoint. And yeah, about, I want to say 6 years ago now is when we first started Attention Agency, and just grown it up to about 30 employees and a whole lot of real happy clients because this is being recorded right after Black Friday. So a lot of people real happy this year. Love to see it.
Yeah, and I'm Andrew's brother, so we've had a lot of the same experiences. Also, a business partner. Um, Started in affiliate marketing as well. That performance, like driving, for anybody that doesn't know what affiliate marketing is, it's like you use your own money to drive conversions for other brands. About 4 or 5 years into being affiliates, we decided to pivot to try to create it. Well, we started first creating our own brands and some e-services, and did that for a couple years. Really, like I think because we were scaling other people's brands using our own money, it was like, well, why don't we do our own brands? And then we did that for a little bit, and then one of the businesses that we decided to start was an agency, probably more like trial by fire. We had a couple of different businesses that asked us for help doing their stuff, and it's kind of like a pivotal moment. We're like, oh, aha, like we can actually do this for other people. People want us to like would be interested in us running their ads. Um, and so we kicked off Attention Agency, as Andrew said, 2018. We've been growing it ever since. Started in like what we knew, which was paid social, paid search. That's really like where we kind of like what our bread and butter was. How we grew our own brands and services. Andrew like decided he really wanted to figure out email and SMS marketing, and then direct mail, messaging marketing, like just add holistically, which include push notifications and app management more recently. On my side, I got really into like the whole search and Google ecosystem and YouTube, trying to figure that out. And that expanded into like programmatic and connected TV and all these different things. And on the social side, we expanded into TikTok, which is super exciting. There's so much that's going on there. And it's fun, man. Like, I think we come from an entrepreneurial background, and what the agencies allowed us to do is like scratch that entrepreneurial itch without needing to have a ton of different projects, right? You can tackle new things without, without starting something completely new.
Yeah, and I know we have a focus for today's call, but a couple questions popped up in my mind as y'all were sharing different things that you do that way. I did hear you say, Andrew, a lot of happy clients after Black Friday, Cyber Monday. How was the Meta experience for you during this time? I'll just give you a quick pain point that we had. We had a nice glitch with one of our clients' accounts. I had a daily ad spend limit of 18,000. It had been that way. The setup of the ad account and the business manager had been how it was for years. And one day, so the weekend after Black Friday, so this past weekend, it randomly changed from 18,000 daily spend limit to $100 daily spend limit because the address on the payment methods page did not match the address on the business manager page. So the portfolio page, so they changed it. And luckily, because support couldn't help, luckily, as soon as we aligned the addresses, it went immediately back as soon as we refreshed the page. But just some fun meta bugs as we're.
I swear, we warn clients across every channel and across every vertical, right? Every year something happens. Yeah. I mean, back in, I think it was 2021 when AWS took down the entire internet on Black Friday, right? Or maybe it was the day before, right? That's a huge issue.
You couldn't do anything.
You couldn't do anything, right? You just had to fly blind, hoping that everything was still going, that people could check out, right? Every year something happens. I'll say this year, Black Friday day was, for the most part, unaffected. But this past weekend, actually, the weekend after Black Friday, we had a client who every year they run an annual promo for the weekend. They have it tied to their brand, to their product, and everything was going great straight out of the gate. It actually was outperforming Thanksgiving in terms of total revenue and in terms of CPA, everything. And then Saturday, Facebook had a glitch very similar to what you just kind of like outlined, where all the ads turned off for
Mm.
about 5 hours, and it definitely hampered the growth and performance. But it was still, I say that because that day, Saturday, ended up being, I think, 20K lower than Black Friday day for this brand. And this is
Mm.
a fairly big brand. So the fact that they were right there, I mean, $20,000 is a lot of money, right? But
Mm.
that was maybe 0.5% off total rev. It's pretty crazy to see. I wish that that hadn't happened, but compounding the effect of Black Friday with the following weekend, it performed really well. So thankfully, not too many delays, not too many issues this year. But again, it's a fact of life. Every year, something's going to happen. Like especially on the SMS side. The one thing that we always make sure to tell clients is, hey, you have to have, honestly, like you should have everything scheduled November 1st. But no matter what, especially on SMS, you have to have that scheduled a week before Black Friday,
Mm.
because Black Friday and Cyber Monday, those are the two most competitive, biggest sales days of the year. Uh, you don't want to be delayed. You don't want to send a Black Friday text message and have it go out on Saturday.
Yeah, yeah, we say something similar for Facebook ads, with making sure that we get them reviewed and approved at least a week before, because there's been previous years where it could be extended delays for getting ads reviewed and approved on that as well.
Yeah, I feel like it's either ad reviews or payment issues like what you experienced. So like there's some kind of disconnect between payment methods, or credit cards go down. Like, usually on the operator side, like the brands don't update their credit limits or give warnings that like you're going to see like $100,000 come through in a weekend, and like be
Mhm.
ready, or in a day even, like be ready for it. And it winds up shutting them down for a little bit. I don't think we had too many big issues other than the one that Andrew brought up, which was nice because
Yeah.
so much of it is out of your control. As like we're not handling the payments, we're not handling the ad approval, so it's like, what can we do except plan ahead and then hope for the best when we execute.
Yeah, I mean that's part of the agency life. I mean, I even feel as the industry has moved over the past, let's say, a year and a half, 2 years, towards creative strategy being the real hot topic and focus for paid social. That's kind of a byproduct of platforms trying to automate the media buying and making the media buying um, less pivotal, and also just the data loss that's happened with iOS and different limitations that way. And it's just continued to drive people towards less growth hacky media buying, audience duplicating and relaunching, and all these different tactics, to really focusing on understanding your audience and understanding your messaging. And agencies have to adapt and evolve with that through your team structure and the processes and the SOPs that you have. And that comes into creative testing and all that sort of stuff as well. What within your agency, do you have like dedicated creative strategists that handle work, and then dedicated media buyers that are separate, or have you kind of morphed that role together? What does that generally look like?
We've experienced both. We have had dedicated creative strategists for our clients to help ideate, help develop briefs, and we have had our like more senior media buyers, and like really like we try to think of everybody as a strategist rather than a media
Mm-hmm.
buyer. Like connecting names and like what they mean. Like a media buyer to me is just somebody who like pushes buttons, loads ads, changes budgets. And a strategist is like a deeper thinker, somebody who is, as you said, trying to connect not just who your audience is, but it's like understanding product market fit, understanding who am I talking to today? What are the markets that I'm missing out on, and how do I get those markets in and like in a in an acquisition era where everybody's saying go broad, right? We don't have as much data. We can't go as granular. We don't have the tracking we used to. So we have to go broader. But at the same time, you have to still find those paths to converting specific audiences, right? Not everybody, when we think about a broad audience, not everybody is going to buy. Not everybody is a buyer. So how do we find those paths? And they say like creative iteration, creative strategy, but the creative strategy still has to be defined by a target audience, right? And that target audience is that pain point, the feature or benefit that they care about, the thing, right? Like what makes it conversational within a segment of the population. And who are the creators and the strategists, just because you're more attuned to one platform, whether that's YouTube or TikTok or Meta, like Instagram, Facebook, or Snap, or wherever it is, versus holistic, doesn't mean you don't understand how those people need to be spoken to. So I think on our side, we like the idea, and we've kind of built our approach around an inclusive strategy, right? Where get the opinions of everybody, turn it into a roundtable, right? Like a roundtable discussion. The brand has an opinion, the buyers or strategists have an opinion, and getting all of those connected is going to connect the dots between what the strategists know the platforms need in order to be successful and what the brand knows the product has to be positioned as. And then kind of like in between that, you have the creative strategists that can connect the dots with like, what's the story in the briefing process? Like, how do we actually put all of these ideas to words, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think too, there in ecom, in DTC, there's a notion that to be a creative strategist, you have to be a creative first. And I don't necessarily align or agree with that, because the most important thing, especially in ecom, is to understand how to analyze data. And when you're able to perform creative testing at scale and aggregate learnings and identify those KPIs that you're looking for, you can figure out how to iterate on creative based on whether or not you're targeting top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom funnel, whatever uh, system you use to refer to the customer lifecycle, right? But being able to start with the data and then take a kind of like analytic lens to the actual creative that fits in those buckets and make assumptions, hypotheses, guesstimations on what it was that really drove that action. Then you can take that back to the drawing board and go through the briefing process, go through the creator or actor identification process and figure it out from there. But I do think that you have to be able to kind of straddle both worlds of being kind of like a data analyst and a creative strategist to really to hone creative iteration.
Yeah, I've heard that like a lot of talking to a lot of creative, I get like self-defined creative strategists. A lot of them came from the media buying background. And what's interesting is that kind of speaks to what Andrew's saying. Like, if you think about it, like you have left brain, right? Like the analytic versus the creative. And the question is like, are those two separate people, or have you just spent more time flexing or training one of those muscles more than the other? So if you spent more time understanding, like from a paid channel strategist or a media buyer perspective on like how to understand looking at audiences and segmenting audiences and thinking about like, I look at that creative, I didn't make it, but I can look at it and I can understand who that's supposed to speak to. And then I can define the audiences and then I can interpret whether that's successful. Well, okay, you got the analytical part down. Now let's start thinking about how do you train your imagination to think about what could be, right? What's next? What can we do? What can we get excited about? What's worth testing? And like some people, that scares them, right? The idea of like, finding what's inside their own imagination and unlocking that piece. It scares them. They're not excited by it. So maybe they're not going to step into that creative strategist role. But I think that there are more people that would be interested in that. And it's also the other way too, right? The person who's like super imaginative and they understand like how many times you gotta like switch frames and what time sequences and like how do you write a hook that matters, but they don't really care about the data, right? Well, if you dive into it, you might get excited about what you learn on like interpreting the data and the success points in like let's change a frame every 3 seconds. Okay, but to what's next, right? Because you think you know, but once you see the data, you don't. I think that there are more people that would want to do both than just one or the other.
Yeah, and I think you both bring up an interesting point. And I was actually reading a book this week that touched on this, and it answered a question I've always kind of tried to solve when it comes to training team members. And I bring this up to focus on how you said it could be media buyers that are doing the creative strategy. I think people that move from media buying to creative strategy, if we're talking specifically about paid social ads, actually have an advantage because of the pathway that they've taken to learn. And what I've always wondered is when training team members, sometimes I feel like there's something that I just know or just understand, but I have a hard time explaining why I know that or understand that. It's just second nature, if you will. But it's because I've learned it iteratively over time. And in the book that I read, the example was focusing on two different things. One was people doing plane spotting during World War II to understand if it was their country or a different country's plane. And the other one was people that identify the gender of baby chicks like as quickly as possible so you can separate them and go through that process. And
what's this book? I got to read this book.
What was it? This right here, actually. It's for software technically, but Making Users Awesome.
Okay.
Nice.
So awesome. And it goes through
your affiliate link in the chat.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. It took a left turn because it started focusing more on how to train people than anything. But it started to talk about how people would go on the line to identify the gender of chicks or try to identify the planes, and they would get explained how to do it, but then they would fail. And the way that they ended up solving that was they would try to identify a chick or a plane, and the person would give them corrective feedback. And then they would try again, corrective feedback, try again. And over time, it just became second nature for them as well, to where they just learned it. And I feel like translating that to media buying, you've run ads so long, you can just look in an ad and say, oh, that's going to perform or that's not going to perform. I can't tell you why, but I just know that that's not going to perform or it won't. We can run it and see data, but it becomes a second nature. Whereas if you come at it from the creative side, you don't have that data backing. So then you have to kind of learn that and figure out what testing is like and all of that as well. I don't know if either of you have seen that or feel that.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, I think like the benefit of coming from the media buyer side first is that you understand the platform, right? And you've probably been exposed to a lot of variation in ad creative that, in format and in so like statics versus GIFs versus product flat lays versus videos, short form, long form, and like I think every media buyer will have, or every strategist will have an opinion, right? And they'll say like GIFs will never work. They don't work. Why? Because they always try, like they've tried them so many times and they never work, and that's just an assumption that they have. Sometimes you come across a situation where somebody is very affirmative in what they believe, and then they're forced to test it, usually by the brand. Like, I get what you're saying, but just please do it. And we're proven wrong, right? That we're proven like the long form video actually did work. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's product and audience specific, right? If you have a product that speaks to an older audience and you're used to running D2C towards like younger audiences, you got this thing that's like, now it's like 45 to 65-year-olds a sweet spot. Well, they're used to those long form infomercials, right? That's going back to TV ads. They're just used to it. So they're willing to spend more time watching versus like your millennials and younger. Like, if I can't figure it out within the first 3 seconds, I'm gone. Right. Mm-hmm. So like it's just how you speak. And like, that's where I think media buyers do have an advantage, because they'll understand quickly, like what you said, the second nature. I've been doing this so long. I know it's going to work. I know that that's boring. That's exciting. That will work, but I can't explain why.
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that's where brands and creatives get frustrated is they're like, well, you're telling me that I have to do things by data backing, but you're also just telling me that it won't work and you can't tell me why. So like, can we just test it? And on the creative side, I don't think that I don't. What would be their advantage if I were to steel man like the creative advantage is probably like that they don't have a bias,
Yeah.
right? That they're coming to it and saying like, let's just test it. Let's see if it works. Like, let's see if this thing can actually sway. And they're not coming with an approach that like, or coming from a perspective that something absolutely will not work. So both sides have an advantage in an approach. Um, I think the biggest issue that I've seen in the creative side and the performance side, is the words they use to describe things. You have analytic versus creative. It's like it's two completely different languages. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really like the person who's successful, I think, in a creative strategy role, combining data and creative, is that they get how both sides look at the same problem and they know how to like negotiate the solution, right? Otherwise, you just have two people on two polar opposite sides of the equation, one arguing like something's definitely not going to work, and the other one saying, well, test it. And they just battle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is why I think it's so important to have a some sort of tool that you're using to aggregate these creative learnings and constantly test them, because innate knowledge is learned knowledge, right? I say that as someone who is a terrible audio learner. I can't, like, I tried to do Audible to read books and realized that I would like zone out, but you put an actual book in front of me, I can actually read through it. um,
I'm the
it's
same
even
way.
better when you're interacting and interfacing with something, right? I just a really brief anecdote. I was chatting with someone the other day who was running into this very weird technical issue with their Klaviyo account, and they asked me to take a look at it. And it, I kind of like took a look at the account. I'm clicking around a handful of tabs, and within a couple minutes, I identified what the problem was, and we found it. We looked at it. It was indeed the problem, and we had the solution. And they asked, how did you do that? And it was kind of the exact same response, right? It's, oh, I just kind of like know things,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you know things because you've been in either the
Repetition.
exact same or similar instances where you had to deal with that or something like that. So you know at least that starting point on how to get to the end goal. I think the problem for kind of the traditional media buyers when they're butting heads with creatives is that so much of that innate learned knowledge is in fact on the platform
Mm-hmm.
and on data analysis, and not so much on the creative testing, creative iteration, and how to evolve the creative. So a prime example on Meta, I want to say 2, 3 years ago, orange was one of the worst background colors you could add to static ads, right? It just wouldn't work, which kind of went counterintuitive because Meta is white and blue or black and blue, depending on whether or not you're a light mode user like Justin or if you're the right mode user like me.
I'm dark mode, man. Don't get me lost.
uh, but like going to the opposite of the color spectrum from blue to orange, you'd expect that would pop, that would get more attention, more traffic, more impressions, whatever. And it turned out to be really bad. Now, that is a learned experience, but that's not a learned experience that is a permanent experience that is going to change over time. And to be so set and rigid in your ways to say orange never works, well, orange can work. It hasn't worked historically. So what do we need to do to fix that? That's how you train the media buyer. Now, the from the other perspective, creatives, because again, creatives, the one thing they hate being told is, oh, I just don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, what about it don't you like? Do you
Yeah.
not like the kerning of the font because the letters are too close or too far apart? Do you not like the font style? Do you not like the color? Right? There's so many things that you can use, but media buyers don't know what kerning
I was
is.
going to say
Media
that's a
buyers
follow-up
don't
question.
know like different font styles and types. Like, what's the difference between a sans and a serif font? Right? Like those are questions that a creative innately knows because that is their learned experience for their platform, if you will. Right? So the biggest unlock for those two different teams is to, like Justin said, get them speaking the same language by sharing their innate knowledge with one another. Because I can explain the innate knowledge that I have with Klaviyo or with Postpilot or with PostScript, right? Like I can talk to that to a creative in a way that is accessible and in a way that they can understand. And so being able to reciprocate that back and forth, that's how you unlock the teams to really figure out what the gender of a chicken is.
Yeah. Well, I know we're coming to the top of our time, and I appreciate you both being on here. But I want to kind of close this out by just understanding what you two feel like is going to be, I don't want to say 2025 predictions. That's the buzzword or the hook everybody uses for social. But what do you think is going to be happening in the industry? I'll start by saying I think two things that might not necessarily fully come to fruition in 2025, but I think will be important for brands and for agencies. Justin, you actually touched on this, and this is one thing that I've been looking at myself is making sure, you always hear on social and you always hear people talking about doing creative testing by messaging angle or theme or emotional motivator or rational. But I think there's a layer on top of that, and it is understanding you testing that by persona or by demographic or audience type. And I think there will likely be a move in 2025 to focus on persona specific messaging or persona specific angles. Quick example, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, we work with an outdoor grilling brand. Their sales generally taper when it gets cold outside because people aren't grilling. And they wanted to increase sales and not just slap us a discount on top of it to hurt their margins that way. So we looked at how we could try to achieve that, and we ended up doing some voice of customer research and ultimately went towards the gifting angle for him because we saw that, buying a gift for your husband, your dad is like pulling teeth that way, right? We looked at the data, and generally males were 88 to 89% of the purchasers for the previous part of the year. We had females beat male purchasers by 100 purchases during Black Friday, Cyber Monday with a $20 lower CPA during that period as well. So we were able to use creative strategy and a messaging angle to focus on a persona that way. So I think that's one. And I think the other one is just like I said with testing by messaging angle. I think it can be easy to get caught up in the DR, the direct response side of creative strategy, and let's focus on ROA. How can we get this today? I think there will continue to be a move towards brand-oriented creative, and I don't just mean brand in the sense of kerning or design style or things like that, like what looks nice, but what do we want to train people to know us for? What do we want to train people to expect from the product and from the business? And trying to narrow focus a bit with messaging and creative, which will really take partnership with brands and with agencies because it's difficult to get hired as a performance agency and have a long-term play. You know what I mean? You need some quick wins in the first 90 days. But I see those two things being important, might not necessarily come to full fruition next year, but being important for the continued landscape evolution of paid media. Anything that you all see happening or see changing or going on next year?
So I actually 100% agree with the two things you just said, and those would actually be mine as well, because there were a lot of brands that did really well this year in 2024. The brands that hurt the most this year hurt for really like two reasons, and maybe there was a combination of the two as well, but it's really two reasons, and they're totally separate from one another. Either they had been spending the past couple of years with growth at all costs as the mindset, let me borrow money to finance this operation, and they had to make a very hard pivot to profitability. that is not easy to do. Like, you can't just turn that on a dime. That's a cruise ship,
That
right? That's a
software model
cargo ship.
for
You're changing a degree at a time
yeah.
to get back to profitability. So it's hard to do, and you get into a heavy discounting cycle, which personally I view as a death loop, right? Like, if you're always on discount, then just lower your prices. You're not always on discount. You just need to be less expensive. The other reason is brands did not reinvest into their own content. So it's great to have creative iteration and creative testing to figure out what is performing on ads channels, but creative doesn't stop at performance channels, right? Creative is, what does your website look like? What do your organic channels look like? What do people that post about you post, right? Like, all of this needs to be worked into the mix. So for me in 2025, it's, how are brands going to create that branded content based on the learnings that they're deriving from all the channels that they're working on and through. The second is, how are brands going to diversify into more channels? There's a lot of brand new channels, or kind of like fledgling channels, that are out there right now that not everybody is on, right? So how do you get onto those channels? How do you scale those channels and work those into your current digital marketing model, right? Like 2015, every channel was its own thing. It was Meta does Meta things, Google does Google things, email does email things. None of them really talk to one another, right? But now you can have your CRM populating, dynamic segments that you can push to your paid media channels to retarget, build lookalikes, do whatever, right? And all of that is feeding into your North Beams, your Triple Whales of the world, that are showing you what that customer conversion path looks like. When you layer that creative testing on top of that, you unlock that understanding of what type of content needs to be delivered or served or presented to this specific customer avatar at this specific time. When do I need to hit them with a YouTube retargeting ad based on their behaviors and interactions with the website thus far?
I don't know how I'm going to follow up with you guys. So like, I think about like the last 3 years, 2 to 3 years. And as Andrew said, there's this huge pendulum swing that happened, right? I feel like it was pre-COVID. It was, so God, it's 2025 already. So it's like the past 5 years have just been this like crazy swinging back and forth. And it went from, as Andrew said, like growth at all cost, to profitability over everything, to now the drumbeat that I keep seeing is like ROAS doesn't matter, and you have to build your brand, and that's the only thing. And anecdotally, talking to individual brands that are feeding my understanding of like the whole market, is that brands have been discounting like crazy because consumers aren't spending. Like, they don't want to spend their money unless they perceive value. And brand, like, obvious, like, clearly the most efficient way to communicate value is to discount, right? Like, the value is the same, we're just going to get it to you for less, versus trying to communicate in different ways why you're better than the competition, which is increasingly more complicated with things like Temu and Alibaba, where you can buy the exact same thing. It looks exactly the same as something that's like $500, but you can get it for 50, right? Now might be lower quality, might be the same quality, but like, it's very hard for brands to communicate the value of the thing that they're building, especially when like you look at things like Temu and Alibaba, and like your IP doesn't even matter, right? Like, you're using manufacturers that are gonna burn your IP, and then they're gonna reuse it. Next thing you know, you got 50 knockoffs. We've worked with so many brands that had that still have amazing products, but it's like, you go on Amazon and like, you're trying to sell it for $150, and you got Amazon sellers with nonsense names that are selling it for 70. And when the consumer goes and looks at it and it looks exactly the same, if they don't know your brand and they don't trust your brand yet because they're not a previous purchaser, how do you communicate that to them? So I think like a few of the things that's one big thing, right? Is like, how do you focus? How do you build a full funnel approach that doesn't allow this huge pendulum swing back and forth? Like, oh, branding is more important than performance. No, it's not. Everything is important, right? And we have to balance the growth of a brand with actually selling the product. And you can't just close your eyes and hope that the branding works, right? You have to have all that, but that means everything has a place in the funnel, and there's execution points for everything. And you're trying to scale it instead of a hockey stick. You're looking for these little wins that you can scale into, and over time you see that incremental growth. So I think hopefully that's a big part of 2025 is brands not trying to find the fast win and just focusing on like, let's get back to our core and let's figure out what's most important to us this year. And it is both. Let's build our brand, let's build it healthily, let's cut back on discounting, let's figure out our product market fit, let's figure out how are we going to position, and let's communicate that. And then you drop in your discounts to do what you have to do, but don't overemphasize on email, past purchasers, and discounts. Second thing I think is really critical is like on the creative front, because a lot of these platforms, the push to AI, the push to automation, the broader audience, the data deprecation, that's where that whole like creative iteration and like creative optimization and creative strategy came from, right? Like let your creative do the audience finding.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, but what does that really mean? And how do we do that at scale, right? Like there's a lot of creative houses that have popped up over the past couple of years that can do UGC at scale, that can do statics at scale, that can do all this stuff like more efficiently, cost effectively. But like that doesn't mean it's going to perform, right? So part of 2025, some of the things Andrew and I talk about all the time is like, how do you make sure that how do you scale creative while holding everybody accountable, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you hold your influencers and creators accountable? How do you hold the media buyers accountable? How does everybody have skin in the game to make sure that you're not just pumping out meaningless content, but so it's intentional, but you can do it at scale. And if it's intentional, then you're testing into different audiences, which all goes back to brands understanding what they're trying to accomplish. Mm-hmm. And it can't just be make more money, get me more new customers. Well, what's your product? Where's the product market fit? Who are we trying to bring in? Otherwise, it's like the media buying game it is becoming automated. There is less emphasis on, as you said, the growth hacky stuff. And it's becoming like, even internally, I hear conversations like, let's go broad audiences. And if you keep telling people we're just going broad, then what their natural question is going to be, well, then what do I need you for?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. That's that like media buyers and strategists have to, and agencies and freelancers and internal operators, like they got to know that, like, if you're just doing what Meta tells you, or you're just doing what Google tells you, and you can't figure out the paths to that mm-hmm. incremental changes and the strategies that find new audiences, find new ways of talking about the same product or a new product, you yourself are going to work yourself out of a job because mm-hmm. you're not bringing the same value. The market's changed. The landscape is different. The tools have evolved, and we have to collectively understand how to create. For us, like, this is 2025. I think in our places, like, how do we, in a changing landscape, how do we continue to bring value to our brand partners?
I agree with that 100%. I mean, I've even seen Zuckerberg, to echo your part on the like media buyers replacing themselves, right? I've seen Zuckerberg say his goal in the future is to where you just put creatives into Ads Manager and it does the rest, right? I mean, that's the direction. I think platforms saw with iOS and, a lot of data loss that they needed to own the channel or own the purchase experience, so shops and things like that, but they also needed to own the media buying, which is scary because you're letting them grade themselves and build the test and, everything that way. But, it's where the industry is going. And I always tell, our team, especially anybody that's doing media buying, like, keep your head on a swivel. You can either likely go to be a data analyst for a channel. You can likely try to go horizontal to know how to do many channels, or you need to move up and focus on understanding how to be like a marketing manager or have copywriting abilities so you can know how to communicate things, because just the media buying role, yeah, I think in the next 2 to 4 years is going to be close to eradicated.
Like I know, like if you think about like what's one of the biggest pain points that I hear from strategists and buyers on the meta side is when they get assets from, you know, creative houses or whatever, it doesn't respect safe zones, or it's duplicative across, like, you know, you'll have your 16 by 9, your 4 by 5, and your 1 by 1, when really all you need is like one asset that has all of the safe zones.
Yeah, it's good 4 by 5. Yeah.
It cuts down the load times so significantly, right? Well, think about like how AI can actually start solving that problem. If it can recognize text in an asset, and then all of a sudden it can duplicate the image. And I think Adobe already has this feature where if you expand the frame and you say fill this, it'll it'll recognize the patterns and expand it out. We'll take that idea and say, okay, I understand what the layout is and I understand the text, and now I'm just going to take your text in your font and I'm going to move it into the safe zone I need. And now I'm going to create all of like every asset that we need. Well, what just happened to the creative house? Right? Creative house only needs to produce one asset, which means they have less output, which means they're not billing as much, right? Or they have to create way more iterations of the same asset across a lot of different formats. That also cuts down a lot of like the media buyer loading time, right? So they can be more efficient, but it also, like, what does that actually mean for their time? Like, how do that, like, what does all of this mean, right? And I think it's for the better. I think it's going to cut down a lot of friction that people feel and a lot of like uselessness. But the big picture for me, I think that you just touched on as well, is like all of this stuff is happening so fast. Compute is increasing. I can't think of what the theorem is on like that every year the compute doubles. It's getting like, it's crazy like how fast it's getting. I think Elon Musk officially owns the largest computer in the world, and it's something like 10,000 CPUs tied together. So when you think about like how compute is evolving and what that means, it's going so much faster than we're comfortable with, right? What it's able to do. But that also, like, it's great that it can do all this stuff, but there has to be a person that can execute on it. So when you say keep your head on a swivel, I agree. Like, understand how the landscape is shifting and what are the new roles and responsibilities of the strategist, right? Because eventually you're going to probably be able to plug in to a meta platform. These are all my goals. This is my P&L. This is my profit. This is my contribution margin. And these are the goals that I want to hit. And it's just going to give you like feedback that says, hey, like, we're doing everything we can, just like a media buyer does now. We're doing everything we can with the creative that you've given us. It's not working. We've tested against all of these different audiences. So we need different creative. And this is what we recommend based on like-kind, whatever like-kind brands that are telling the exact same story. Like, you have a basics company. This is what Built is doing. This is what Cuts is doing. This is what Fresh Clean Threads is doing, or Fresh Clean Threads. So like, this is what we recommend, and here's what it could potentially look like. The future is unwritten, but there's so much potential. How that translates to strategy and how we each evolve into that it's exciting. It's scary. It's like, it's all the things, right? But we just have to be ready for it. We have to be able to anticipate it.
It's a lot better than putting up billboards.
Yeah. Just with closing thoughts to echo what you said, I saw a Sam Altman interview with Trevor Noah. It was an episode right after he got fired and then brought back to OpenAI, or before he got brought back, I believe. But they were talking about replacing jobs, and that was a fear of people for AI. And he mentioned when ChatGPT popped up, it popped up at the right time, because the worst thing they could have done is bury it for 10 years and then it come out and it's artificial intelligence like to the extreme and everybody just freaks out. I mean, look at how we responded to it, 2 years ago at this point or a year ago?
Mm-hmm.
But what he called out is people generally, historically, from his research, respond okay to workplace or workforce shifts over a 10 or 15 year period. And I think that's what we'll be going through, and what he's kind of projecting as well, is jobs may start to get replaced, but it's going to be iterative, because now when a new ChatGPT model comes out, it's not as big of a deal as it was when the first one came out. And so they're going to keep coming out, and it's going to keep adapting to our lifestyles, and it's just going to happen.
Yep.
So I think I agree with what you're saying, where keeping your head on a swivel to not just letting it pop up on you in 6 years where you don't have a job anymore and the market's not there for you to try and apply to a new job. Get proactive. If you're listening to this, you're a media buyer, get proactive now and start looking for new opportunities, for new things that you can train yourself in. That self-education is so important to continue to grow and to continue to learn that way. So, well, Justin, Andrew, I appreciate you both coming on today. This was a great chat. I had about 15 questions written down. I think I asked one of them because we started talking, and I said, "Nope, this is a better direction. We're going in this direction." So I love it. Actually, this is always a good sign when we have that happen.
Well, you got two guys on this call who love the sound of their own voice, so it's easy to get us to talk about anything.
No, I thought it was an amazing chat today. I appreciate you both coming on and talking through it. And I'd love to have you on again in the future.
Anytime.
Yeah, absolutely.